The first morning I arrived at my new lakefront cabin, I felt like I was stepping into a dream I had waited years for, but what happened next turned that dream into pure chaos. I had been living in the city for too long, surrounded by constant noise, traffic, and stress. When I finally closed the deal on this property, it felt like freedom. The paperwork had gone through quicker than expected, so technically, I had the right to move in earlier than I planned. I loaded up my truck, strapped boxes into the back, and even brought my dog along, ready to start fresh. The sun was just rising over the trees when I pulled onto the gravel road leading to my cabin. The lake shimmered in the distance, and for a moment, I thought life was finally going my way. But then, out of nowhere, a figure stood right in the middle of my driveway with arms folded and an expression that could sour milk. That was my first encounter with the woman everyone in the area would later warn me about, HOA Karen. She marched right up to my truck like she owned the entire neighborhood. "You can't be here," she barked before I could even greet her. I rolled the window down and smiled, thinking maybe she was just a concerned neighbor. "Morning. I just closed on the place down by the lake," I explained politely. Her eyes narrowed, and she shook her head like I had confessed to a crime. "That's impossible. No one moves in without HOA approval. And certainly not before we've conducted inspections. You can't just show up." I laughed nervously, thinking she was exaggerating, but then I realized she was dead serious. I stepped out of my truck, holding my paperwork folder just in case, and said calmly, "Ma'am, with respect, this property isn't part of your HOA. It's a private sale. I have the deed right here." She snatched the folder from my hands without asking and skimmed through it like some self-appointed judge, muttering things like, "This can't be right. This isn't valid." I reached out and took it back, saying, "Listen, I bought this land fair and square. You don't have jurisdiction over me." That was all it took to set her off. She started shouting at the top of her lungs, claiming I was trespassing, accusing me of forging documents, and demanding I leave immediately. My dog growled low, sensing the tension, but I tried to keep things calm. Karen wasn't having it. She jabbed a finger at me and yelled, "If you don't leave this instant, I'm calling the authorities." I thought she was bluffing, but within seconds, she whipped out her phone, dialed 911, and started screaming into it. "Yes, police? There's a dangerous man here trying to break into our neighborhood. He doesn't belong. He's a squatter." My jaw dropped. A squatter? On my own land? I tried to reason with her, but she turned her back and continued her dramatic performance, walking in circles like she was giving an Oscar-worthy act for the dispatcher. The sound of sirens in the distance made my stomach sink. All I wanted was a peaceful move-in day, but now I was about to deal with law enforcement thanks to a neighbor who thought she ran the world. I stood on my porch steps, papers in hand, waiting. Karen stood a few feet away, arms crossed with a smug grin like she had already won. "You're going to regret messing with this neighborhood," she muttered. A sheriff's cruiser finally pulled up, followed by another. 2 deputies got out, and immediately Karen ran toward them, waving her arms frantically. "Officers! That's him. That's the man trying to steal property in our community." She pointed at me like I was a criminal caught red-handed. The deputies calmly told her to step aside and approached me instead. "Sir, may we see some identification and any proof of ownership for this property?" one asked. Without hesitation, I handed over my ID, the signed deed, and even the tax documents the county had mailed me. The deputies reviewed everything carefully, flipping through the pages. Karen stood behind them, practically bouncing with anticipation, ready to see me dragged away. But then one of the deputies looked up, nodded, and handed everything back to me. "Sir, thank you. Everything seems to check out. This property is indeed yours. You're not under HOA jurisdiction." The words hit Karen like a slap in the face. Her mouth dropped open, and she stepped forward, shrieking, "What do you mean? He can't just move in without approval. That's not how it works here. The deputy turned to her, expression firm. Ma'am, you have no authority over this property. It's outside the HOA boundaries. You have no say in what he does here. But Karen wasn't about to give up. She argued, whined, and even tried to insist they arrest me anyway, calling me suspicious. One of the deputies finally raised his voice. Ma'am, if you continue making false reports, you could face charges yourself. We're done here. That shut her up, at least temporarily. She huffed, crossed her arms, and stomped off down the road, muttering, "This isn't over. I'll find a way to stop him." As the deputies left, one of them leaned toward me and said quietly, "Don't worry about her. We've dealt with her before. She likes to think she's in charge of everything around here, but legally she can't touch you." I thanked him, relieved, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the last I'd see of Karen. Sure enough, as the taillights of the cruisers disappeared, I glanced across the street and saw her peeking through her curtains, glaring at me with eyes full of fire. That was the beginning of a battle I never asked for but was about to fight head-on. The next few days were nothing short of a nightmare, and I quickly realized that HOA Karen wasn't bluffing when she said, "This isn't over." Every morning when I stepped outside to unload another box from my truck, I found something new taped to my front door. At first, I thought maybe it was a flyer or some sort of welcome note, but no, it was a bright orange slip marked, HOA violation notice. The first one claimed my dog was an unapproved animal, and that I needed to remove him immediately. I laughed it off, thinking she must have the wrong idea. But then, the next day, another notice appeared saying, "Grass exceeds community standard length. Cut immediately." I stared at it in disbelief. Grass? I hadn't even unpacked my lawnmower yet, and more importantly, my property wasn't under HOA control. These weren't real violations. They were just intimidation tactics. By the third day, the notes piled up into a stack accusing me of everything from unauthorized moving activity to unregistered vehicle parked on driveway. Each one had her scribbled signature at the bottom, and every time I read them, I could hear her smug voice in my head. My neighbors started whispering, too. I could see them peeking from behind curtains as if they expected me to be escorted out by police any moment. Clearly, Karen had been spreading rumors about me. I tried to ignore it and focus on unpacking, but then she raised the stakes. One morning, I got in my truck to head into town, only to find her car parked sideways across my driveway, completely blocking me in. She stood nearby pretending to trim her hedges with a giant pair of scissors, but I knew exactly what she was doing. I got out and asked firmly, "Could you please move your car?" She smirked without even looking at me and said, "This is HOA-controlled access. You can't come and go without approval." My patience snapped. "I told you already, I'm not part of your HOA. Move your car or I'll have it towed." Her grin widened like she enjoyed watching me get angry. "Go ahead. Call them. You'll be the one in trouble." I pulled out my phone, pretending to dial a tow company, and only then did she finally shuffle back and move her car, but not before yelling, "This neighborhood has rules, and people like you don't belong here." That incident made me realize I couldn't just ignore her anymore. Karen wasn't just an annoying neighbor, she was actively trying to make my life miserable. I sat down that night and reviewed all the paperwork for my property purchase. That's when I remembered something important. When I first bought the cabin, the realtor mentioned that the land came with an old easement attached. At the time, I didn't think much of it. An easement is basically a legal allowance to use a portion of land for access or utilities, and I assumed it wasn't relevant to me. But flipping through the documents now, I saw that the easement ran along the edge of Karen's property, right next to her driveway. My eyes widened as I realized what this meant. Decades ago, the original owner of my cabin had secured this easement to allow construction trucks and heavy vehicles to pass through without obstruction. It was legally binding and still active. In other words, part of the land that Karen thought was hers wasn't really hers to control at all, it was mine to use whenever I wanted. The more I thought about it, the more it felt like poetic justice. She was trying to block my access with her car? Well, I had the legal right to block hers entirely if I chose to. But instead of rushing into revenge, I decided to handle it the smart way. The next morning, I drove down to the county office and pulled the official land survey records. Sure enough, the easement was clearly marked in black and white. Not only was it legitimate, but it also gave me the right to build or restrict on that strip of land. I spoke with the clerk, who raised an eyebrow when I explained the situation. "Oh, Karen again," he said with a sigh. "You're not the first to complain about her. She thinks she runs this whole area." He stamped the paperwork, registered my rights under my name, and said, "You can do whatever you want with that easement. Just make sure you follow county code." I walked out of that office with a grin on my face. Finally, I had a weapon against Karen, and the best part was it was completely legal. I didn't need to shout or argue or get the cops involved every time she acted out. All I needed to do was quietly prepare my plan and let the law do the talking. For the next few days, I kept my cool, even when she doubled down on her harassment. She left more fake notices, stood outside pretending to film me with her phone, and even cornered one of my neighbors, warning them not to associate with the squatter. But I just smiled, waved politely, and went about my business. Little did she know, I was setting the stage for something she'd never see coming. At night, I lay awake thinking about it. Every time I replayed her smug expression, every time I thought about her calling the cops on me as if I were some criminal, I felt more determined. She wanted me gone. She wanted me humiliated. She wanted me trapped. But instead, I was about to turn the tables on her in the most satisfying way possible. I wasn't just going to defend myself, I was going to make sure she could never pull this stunt on me, or anyone else, ever again. And the best part was, by the time I was done, she wouldn't even be able to drive her oversized SUV into her own driveway without remembering the day she picked a fight with the wrong neighbor. So while Karen thought she was winning, leaving her little notes and parking games, I was quietly arranging contractors, double-checking permits, and preparing the materials I needed. Each passing day brought me closer to the moment when she'd realize she had finally lost control. And when that moment came, it wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be dramatic. It would be perfectly legal, perfectly justified, and perfectly devastating for her fragile ego. The real breaking point came about a week later when Karen decided to escalate her games yet again. That morning I had ordered a small delivery of gravel and construction materials to fix up my driveway and add some reinforcement to the edge of the property. The delivery truck pulled in and began unloading when, sure enough, here came Karen storming out of her house in her robe and slippers like she had nothing better to do. She didn't even hesitate, she picked up her phone and started shouting into it before she got within 10 feet of me. "Yes, this is an emergency. He's dumping illegal materials right next to my driveway. He's destroying community property." I rolled my eyes. Here we go again. The delivery guy looked at me like, "Do you want me to keep going?" And I told him to carry on. I knew exactly what was about to happen. Within 20 minutes, a sheriff's cruiser pulled up. It was the same deputy who had come out before, and the second he saw Karen pointing and screeching, he sighed heavily like a teacher dealing with a spoiled child. "Sir," he asked me, "can I see the delivery paperwork?" I handed it over without a word. He looked it over, checked the county records on his tablet, and then turned to Karen. "Ma'am, he's completely within his rights. The delivery is on his property, and this area by your driveway is part of his easement. You need to stop calling us for things that aren't crimes." Karen exploded. "Easement? No, no, no. That's my land, my driveway. He can't just put rocks there." The deputy held up the paperwork like it was a holy scripture. "Actually, ma'am, yes, he can. It's documented here. If you keep filing false reports, you're the one who's going to be in trouble." She went pale for a second but quickly snapped back, huffing and muttering about lawsuits. The deputy gave me a small nod as if to say, "Good luck," and drove off. That was the moment I knew it was time to put my plan into motion. I had the easement, I had the legal paperwork, and now I had proof that even the sheriff's office recognized my right to do what I was about to do. That night, I called a local contractor, explained the situation, and arranged for them to come out early the next morning. When they showed up with concrete posts and steel reinforcements, I was ready. I stood on the easement line with my documents in hand, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Sure enough, the second Karen saw the trucks. She came running, hair unbrushed, slippers flopping, voice screeching like a fire alarm. "What are you doing? You can't build here. This is my property line." I held up the paperwork calmly and said, "Actually, this strip belongs to the easement. It's registered under my property rights. Everything being done here is legal and approved by the county." My contractor, a big guy with arms like tree trunks, just shrugged and got to work. Karen's jaw dropped as he began digging holes and setting steel posts into the ground. All day long she stood there, pacing back and forth, ranting, and calling people on her phone. I heard snippets like, "I need a lawyer right now," and "They're destroying my driveway access." But no one came to stop us, because no one could. By sunset, the posts were in place, thick, heavy-duty steel bollards set into concrete bases. They didn't touch her driveway directly, but they narrowed the entrance just enough that it was impossible for a large vehicle to swing in comfortably. My pickup truck could fit easily, but her oversized SUV? Not a chance. That evening, as the contractors left, Karen stood in her yard with her hands on her hips, glaring at me like I had personally destroyed her life. I just smiled and waved. The next morning was when the real fun began. I sat on my porch sipping coffee as Karen came barreling down the road in her SUV. She slowed when she saw the posts, rolled down her window, and shouted, "Move those things right now or I'll have them torn out." I just held up the easement paperwork and said, "Not happening." She growled in frustration and tried to pull into her driveway anyway. The screech of metal on metal filled the air as her bumper scraped against one of the posts. She slammed the brakes, jumped out of her car, and screamed at the top of her lungs. "You'll pay for this. You can't do this to me." I calmly replied, "Check with the county records. It's all legal. Maybe you should get yourself a smaller car." Her face turned beet red as neighbors peeked out their windows, some even chuckling behind their hands. For years, she had terrorized them with bogus violation notices and power trips. Now they were seeing her get a taste of her own medicine, and they loved it. Karen stomped back into her SUV, tried again to angle it into the driveway, and scraped it worse the second time. Finally, she gave up, parked halfway into the street, and stormed into her house, slamming the door so hard it rattled the glass. That was only the beginning. Over the next week, I watched her daily struggle just to get in and out of her own property. She tried everything, angling, reversing, even using wooden boards to try and guide her tires. Nothing worked. Each attempt left fresh scratches on her SUV, and each failure made her temper worse. One afternoon, she cornered me while I was unloading groceries. "This is harassment. You're targeting me," she screamed. I shrugged and said, "Karen, it's not harassment if it's legal. Maybe you should spend less time worrying about me and more time learning property law." The look on her face was priceless. She had no comeback. Word spread quickly around the neighborhood. People who had once avoided me now stopped by to chat. One older gentleman chuckled and said, "You finally gave her what she deserved. She's been pulling this nonsense for years." Another neighbor whispered, "We were all too scared to stand up to her, but you actually did it. Thank you." I realized then that Karen's reign of terror hadn't just been directed at me, she had been tormenting the whole community, and now they finally had hoped she might be put in her place once and for all. Karen, of course, tried to fight back in her own ways. She filed complaints with the HOA, but they couldn't touch me because I wasn't a member. She tried calling county inspectors, but every time they came out, they confirmed the posts were legal. She even tried threatening to sue me, but when her lawyer looked at the easement paperwork, he apparently told her she didn't have a case. I heard through the grapevine that he actually dropped her as a client because she refused to accept reality. Day by day, her frustration grew. She couldn't intimidate me with fake notices. She couldn't block my driveway anymore because hers was already a nightmare to get into. She couldn't rally the HOA against me because I was outside their control. For the first time, she wasn't the queen of the neighborhood, she was trapped in her own losing battle, boxed in by her own arrogance. And the best part was, I didn't need to raise my voice or lose my temper. I let the law do all the talking, and the law spoke louder than any of her tantrums ever could. From the moment those steel posts went into the ground, everything about the neighborhood changed, and Karen knew it too, though she tried hard not to show it at first. Every morning I sat on my porch with a cup of coffee, watching her daily battle with her oversized SUV like it was a free comedy show. She would inch forward, back up, adjust her angle, and then try again, only to scrape the side mirror or grind her bumper against the posts. Sometimes she'd just sit there with her head on the steering wheel, too embarrassed to continue while neighbors walked by pretending not to laugh. I could see it in their eyes though, they loved it. For years she had bullied them with fake violation letters, surprise inspections, and endless threats about rules, and now here she was, humiliated in front of everyone, struggling with a driveway she used to flaunt as a symbol of her control. Her precious SUV, which she always bragged about being the only proper vehicle for this neighborhood, suddenly became her greatest burden. At first, she tried to retaliate in small ways. She stood outside filming me with her phone whenever I walked my dog, muttering things like evidence under her breath. She mailed me letters claiming I owed community fees, despite the county already telling her she had no jurisdiction. She even started planting little garden ornaments along the edge of her driveway like she was trying to reclaim the space from the easement. But the law was the law, and those posts weren't going anywhere. When she placed her ornaments too close, I simply had them moved by the county workers maintaining the easement, and each time they did, I made sure to wave at her with a smile. Her face would twist into pure rage, and she'd slam her door shut. Over time, the effect snowballed. Because she couldn't easily access her driveway, her guests stopped visiting. Delivery trucks refused to come to her house, complaining they couldn't squeeze past the posts without damaging their vehicles. I overheard one driver telling her, "Lady, this setup is a nightmare. We're not risking it again." Even the mail carrier started leaving packages at the edge of the street instead of by her porch. She had built her entire identity on being in control of her community, but now she couldn't even control how her groceries arrived. Meanwhile, I was thriving. My cabin became a peaceful retreat. I spent my days fixing it up, planting a small garden, and taking my dog on long walks by the lake. Neighbors I hadn't spoken to before started dropping by with pies, cookies, and even offers to help with renovations. One woman laughed as she handed me a casserole and whispered, "We've been waiting years for someone to finally put Karen in her place. You're a hero around here." Another neighbor confessed that Karen once fined him for leaving his trash can out for 10 extra minutes, and he'd fantasized about moving away just to escape her tyranny. Now he said he felt free again, all because of those steel posts standing like silent guardians at the edge of her driveway. But Karen wasn't done trying. She made one last desperate attempt by filing a formal complaint with the HOA, demanding they take me to court. They sent me a letter, but after I responded with copies of the easement documents and county approval, I never heard from them again. Rumor had it the HOA board told her flat out, "He's not under our authority. Stop dragging us into your personal vendettas." Losing her own board support must have stung worse than any scratch on her SUV. As weeks turned into months, Karen's situation got more pathetic. She eventually bought a tiny compact car just to squeeze in and out of her driveway. The sight of her climbing out of that little vehicle after years of bragging about her massive luxury SUV was something none of us would ever forget. It was poetic justice at its finest. Every time she pulled in, neighbors chuckled, and some even clapped sarcastically. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, had been reduced to a punchline. I'll never forget the day one of the older gentlemen down the street stopped me while I was mowing the lawn. He shook my hand and said, "Son, you don't realize what you've done for us. You stood up to her, and you won. She can't bully people anymore, and it's because you fought back the right way." That meant more to me than I expected. It wasn't just about my property anymore, it was about showing everyone that Karen's power was nothing but smoke and mirrors. Eventually, the final chapter of Karen's reign arrived. One morning, a "for sale" sign appeared in her yard. I nearly spit out my coffee when I saw it. I didn't need to ask why, everyone already knew. She couldn't stand the humiliation, couldn't handle the laughter, and couldn't bear the thought of living every single day boxed in by the consequences of her own arrogance. She lasted maybe another month before a moving truck pulled up, and even that truck couldn't fit into her driveway properly. I watched from my porch as the movers struggled, scraping their rental truck against the posts while Karen yelled at them to be careful. I swear one of the movers laughed under his breath and said, "Maybe you should have thought about that before." By evening, she was gone. Just like that, peace returned to the neighborhood. The day after she moved out, a few of the neighbors gathered in front of my cabin. Someone brought beer, someone else brought a grill, and before I knew it, we were having a mini block party. People who had avoided each other for years because of Karen's constant surveillance were now laughing together, telling stories about all the ridiculous things she had done. One woman admitted Karen once threatened to fine her for having unapproved curtains. Another man said Karen had reported him for unauthorized bird feeders. We laughed until our sides hurt, and for the first time since I moved in, I felt like I truly belonged. Now, whenever I sit on my porch and watch the sun set over the lake, I glance at those steel posts with a quiet satisfaction. They're not just pieces of metal in the ground, they're a symbol. A reminder that standing up for yourself doesn't always require shouting or fighting. Sometimes, all it takes is patience, paperwork, and a little bit of clever strategy. Karen thought she could break me by calling the cops, by spreading lies, and by blocking my driveway. Instead, I turned the tables on her legally and permanently, and in the end, she was the one who had to pack up and leave. The funniest part is that every new neighbor who moves into her old house gets warned right away. People tell them, "Don't mess with that cabin owner across the street. He's the one who took down Karen." It always makes me chuckle. I never wanted to be the neighborhood legend, but sometimes life throws you into battles you didn't ask for, and when that happens, you either fold, or you stand tall. I stood tall, and now every evening, I enjoy my peace, knowing I fought fire with facts and came out on top. Karen called the cops on me for moving in early, but in the end, I legally blocked her driveway forever, and she drove herself right out of the neighborhood.